On Monday, December 15th, 2025, the IJN hybrid battleships will officially go into their early access period, and you'll be able to obtain them by buying the early access crates from the store on Monday. But I believe in that section of the store, there will be a chained bundle, and at the end of that bundle will be this ship, the Tier VII IJN premium battleship Tsurugi. It's hard to tell you any details about the chained bundle other than it will be a chained bundle because I don't know anything more than that. The cost is going to be a bit of a mystery until Monday, but I can at least tell you how the ship performs. We'll run down the specs, and basically before we get into anything, this is an IJN battleship with 6 457mm guns, so you might be thinking it's sort of like the IJN version of Georgia. And it sort of is, but not quite. There's some key differences, and overall, I do think Georgia is a better ship. But before we get into all that, my commander is the Borg Queen. I was originally testing this thing with Takagi at the helm, but I switched to the Borg Queen because I think she's just a better overall choice. And if you're going to go up a chained bundle to buy a premium ship like this, well, it's not a campaign ship, so I'll just be honest with you, I think the paid commander Borg Queen is probably the best way to go if you're going to build this thing. Now, as we shoot our shot, our initial one at the Monarch, and launch our torpedoes, we'll launch right into the specs of this thing. For survivability, that is the major downside, I would say, of the Tsurugi. It's got 69,700 HP, which is basically fine. But the armor scheme is more or less non-existent. You might as well call this thing a battle cruiser rather than a battleship. Although you can see here from this shot against the Wisconsin what the appeal of the ship might be. These guns are pretty nice, but the armor, well, it's got 25mm bow and stern, which can be overmatched by practically everything. The orange section in the middle of the ship, the upper belt armor and the deck armor is only 32. That can of course be penned by a lot, including by a lot of HE. The superstructure is massive, and the citadel is very exposed and hittable. So the survivability of this ship is not great. And, well, you can take a lot of punishment from a lot of different things, so you do have to be careful about it. Although, on the other hand, it does have 41% torpedo damage reduction, which seems like a really high number for a ship with this kind of design, so there is that. Now, the guns, which we've seen in action a little bit, against the Wisconsin and again here against the Monarch, as I said, these are 6 457mm or 18-inch guns. Being 457, they can overmatch 30mm, but not 32. And with this Borg Queen build, we've got an 18.4 kilometer range. Base is 17.1. Reload time with the reload mod is 26.1 seconds, although base it's 29. Snappy turret traverse of 31.3 seconds. That's with the crisscross skill on Borg Queen. Base is 36. And then we've got 2.1 Sigma, and I think PG Rapids, I saw him say the other day that this thing has the same dispersion pattern as Azuma, which he said was confirmed by one of the community managers, so I'll take his word for it. The dispersion on this thing is pretty good along with the Sigma, and as you've seen, the guns are pretty accurate. Although they are still battleship guns, they will troll you from time to time. You'll probably see a bum salvo or two in this very battle. As for the damage numbers, the AP is a base alpha per shell of 14,000. We've got that buffed up a little bit to 14,280 with Borg Queen's base trait, but her special skill in the third row increases the AP damage by a much higher percentage with some gimmicky parameters to it, but basically with that skill, I think we're somewhere around 16,000 per Citadel. And, you know, it's very nice damage. It's comparable, with that skill at least, with the Georgia that shares the same size guns at the tier, but without anything to buff the AP Alpha, only 14,000. Not that that's a low number, but Georgia still has better Alpha base. So there is that. No improved pen angles or anything like that. but it does have really great pen overall. It tells me that the armor penetration at max range is 583 millimeters, which should be enough to punch through even the thickest armor on the most heavily armored battleships you're going to encounter at Tier 7 and Tier 8. The HE, for what it's worth, has a really high alpha of 7,300, but a fire chance of 35%. So I doubt it's worth shooting HE too much in this thing. Secondaries, not really worth mentioning. It does have 8 of them, but they have a base range of 5.2 kilometers, or actually 5 kilometers, so I don't think they're worth building into. And as you've seen, the thing does have torpedoes, although they do have classic IJN heavy cruiser terrible launch angles, where really they can only be launched rearward, as you can see here, and even then the angles are not that great. But these are 2 quadruple launchers on either side of the ship that drop deep water torpedoes into the water. They have a base range of 12 kilometers. They go at 67 knots, and they hit for 19,758 damage with the trademark deep water torpedo detectability of 0.9 kilometers. I don't think they're the primary source of damage on this thing by any stretch of the imagination, but with the survivability parameters we've been over to begin with, this is probably a ship where you're going to be kiting pretty often. You're certainly not going to be doing what the Flandre here has done. You see he's pushed into, 3 battleships and promptly sunk? If we tried to do that, we would have sunk faster. Flandre has much better armor than we do. So these are torpedoes that maybe you would launch at battleships pursuing you as you're kiting, and sometimes you'd get hits on them. But if you try to make them your main armament and get them on target as your first resort, you're going to have to give an awful lot of broadside to do that, and you've already seen the armor scheme. You really can't do that unless going back to port is your goal. But the torpedoes are there, the range is good, and they can be a nice little damage amplifier when they do hit. As for the AA, it just seems fairly decent to me. I have run into a lot of CVs at Tier 7. I think in one battle I even got the Clear Skies medal just because the CV harassed me for the duration, but it doesn't seem any markedly better or worse than any other battleship at the tier when it comes to shooting down planes, so there is that. Maneuverability, though, is a real highlight. I have the speed flag on the ship, so we're a little bit above the base speed, but with that speed flag, 37.8 knots, and I think Borg Queen also has a skill. Yeah, it's the 4th row skill called High Octane Warrior. It's the one I was referring to previously. Buffs battleship projectile damage if previous main battery shot was AP by 10%, but also increases battleship speed by 5%. So we've got that going. We've got the speed flag for another 3% bonus to the speed. And at the end of the day, we've got 37.8 knots. That's without an engine boost or anything like that. It's just a very fast ship. The turning circle, for what it is 890 meters, which seems fine. And the rudder shift is a quick 16 seconds. So good maneuverability here for a battleship that really is more like a battle cruiser. And then the concealment, you've probably already noticed it. Obviously, I'm using the concealment module, and Kondo is one of the inspirations. Even if you don't agree with my concealment philosophy on battleships, this is one you might consider speccing into a little bit with somebody like Kondo or Swirsky if you don't have Kondo at a high level, although I would recommend you do, because if you want to use a concealment inspiration on battleships, then you want Kondo. He gives you a bigger buff than Swirsky does, even though Swirsky is universal and can be applied to any class. But 12.3 kilometers with the concealment module and a rank 16 for Kondo. You could get that a little bit lower if you wanted to spec into double concealment, but I did opt for Iakino as the second inspiration because I think buffing the accuracy on these guns is not that bad of an idea. You can see that this game has turned into a little bit of a blowout at the end, and we've racked up 147,000 damage. Only 1 Citadel. In a couple of games, I've gotten like 7 Citadels, but they were against cruisers. This thing is lethal when it comes to shooting cruisers, particularly if you use the Iakino inspiration. And there's a lot of people I know who like to use Cunningham over Iakino because he gives you a bigger buff to Sigma for every ship, whereas Iachino gives you a 3% buff to Sigma when shooting at battleships and destroyers, I think 1% less than Cunningham, but crucially a 7% buff when shooting at cruisers, and really cruisers are the battleship's primary target, so I like buffing that aspect a lot. Really puts a huge threat to cruisers, and even the ones at Tier 7 with questionable armor schemes like the Edinburgh and its 30mm plating, well, this is going to go right through that, being 457mm guns. So what we have here is a pretty stealthy, pretty fast, lightly armored battleship with a limited number of guns that are very accurate and hit hard. It's a little bit like Georgia, as I alluded to in the beginning. However, I'm still going to say to you that Georgia is a much better ship. I don't know if it's faster, but it's on par with the speed. It has an engine boost, and crucially, it has a lot better armor, and the guns hit harder base. So I prefer the Georgia more, but this is an interesting look into maybe the future. I don't know that this is quite like the IJN Tech Tree Battle Cruiser line that they have on PC, but if anything, this is a fairly strong and unique battle cruiser, particularly with the deep water torpedoes. So depending on the cost of the chain bundle when it comes into the store on Monday, it might be worth pursuing, although I am a little bit skeptical. I guess we'll just have to see. So hope you enjoyed this early look at the Tsurugi. If so, give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.